nosotros siempre hemos sido pacíficos.
Welcome to Middle East Now. I'm your host, Bianca Zanini. Let's jump right into it with tonight's headlines.
Israel is expanding its operations in Gaza, including seizing large areas of land. The U.S. is beefing up its military presence in the Middle East, now sending a second U.S. aircraft to the region. And reports that Turkey is capturing the largest airbase in Syria, a concerning development for Israel.
We begin with Gaza. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz this morning announced that Israel is expanding its operations in Gaza. The IDF will begin seizing large areas of land that will be, quote, added to the state of Israel's security areas, Katz said in a statement, adding that Israeli troops will move to clear areas of terrorists and terrorist infrastructure. Now, the IDF conducted extensive strikes on Gaza overnight, and according to local Hamas-run authorities, dozens of people have been killed in the last 24 hours. One airstrike on an UNRWA clinic in Jabalia, which the IDF says was being used by Hamas operatives, reportedly killed at least 19 people, including 9 children. A few days ago, the IDF issued its most significant evacuation warning for the entire Rafah area and between Khan Yunis since the resumption of the war. Now, the orders came right at the end of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Now, just a short while ago, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave the following statement. Let's take a listen.
Tonight in the Gaza Strip, we shifted gears. The IDF is seizing territory, striking terrorists, destroying infrastructure, and we are doing another thing. We are seizing the Morag Axis. This will be the second Philadelphia Axis. We are now cutting off the Strip, and we are increasing the pressure step by step, so they will give us our hostages. And the more they do not give, the more the pressure will increase until they do.
And we go now live to the Israel-Gaza border, where we're joined by our I-24 News correspondent, Bali Sladin. Thank you so much for being with us here. What's the latest on the ground in Gaza?
Yeah, so let's start with what we have heard from the Prime Minister right now. Just a short while ago, he is clarifying what was the aim of the goal of the airstrikes that happened overnight, the intensive ones. And now we understand that the IDF is capturing all the area from the Philadelphia corridor to what now is being called the Morag Axis, which is right where the Morag settlement was before the disengagement in the early 2000s. That's the new Philadelphia corridor, as the Prime Minister is saying, and that's aiming to pressure Hamas and the Gazans also to accept the current proposal, the Witkoff proposal. Also, I don't want to speculate here, but maybe the new axis right now, the Morag axis, will also reach Al Mawasi, the humanitarian area, where the people in that area could actually get out of the Gaza Strip from Al Mawasi, from the humanitarian area, to the border. That's in accordance with the Trump plan to let voluntarily the people that want to get out of Gaza do that. Now, that's happening while the recent developments in Gaza indicate that the whole operation is going to expand and increase in general. The airstrikes today targeted Deir al-Balah, at least 3 airstrikes. One of them killed Hamas's policeman in that area. The other was in Jabalia, as you've mentioned, the UNRWA clinic, as they called it. The Palestinians are reporting around 20 people being killed. Some of them are women and children. The IDF is saying that Hamas's operatives were using that as a command center, and that's why we targeted it today as well.
All right, I want you to tell us what's happening with the latest wave of the anti-Hamas protests. We hear that there are people back on the streets now.
Yes, definitely. After a few days of the pause that we've seen, apparently that was due to the Eid al-Fitr, the Muslim holiday. Now the protesters are back, specifically in Beit Lahia, just right here behind us in the north of the Gaza Strip. We've seen videos from inside the Gaza Strip, tens of thousands of people. They are calling it a human flood. That's what they are calling it. And many people are taking to the street right now to protest against Hamas, to protest to end the war. And even they are singing to Hamas, get out of Gaza, we don't want you in Gaza. They are using lots of slogans against Hamas, and they are, of course, demanding the end of the war as soon as possible. So now there is a resumption of these protests in spite of the crackdown that we have seen from Hamas. Just today, another Palestinian civilian was killed by a Hamas policeman in Shuja'iyya. That's added to several others that were killed throughout the past week. Because of the protests that we have seen, Hamas is trying to deal with the protesters in their own way with the Iron Fist, but apparently tens of thousands of people are now taken to the street yet again in Beit Lahia.
All right, well, we'll certainly be covering that for our viewers. Balir Sladin, thank you very much for your input. And joining us now in the studio is Rafael Yerushalmi, a security analyst and former senior intelligence officer in the IDF. Thank you for being with us this evening throughout the program. So it's been nearly a year and a half of war. Tens of thousands of people have died. Israeli hostages are still in Gaza. Hamas is still in Gaza. Why is it different this time? And is it different this time with the Israeli military operation in Gaza?
It's different, and there are 2 aspects that are different from the start. The first aspect is the military aspect on the Israeli side, with a much more concentrated, intense attack on many areas of Gaza at the same time. At first, a year and a half ago, when the IDF started its attack, it was gradual. They started by the north, then they slowly went to the center until they reached Rafiah. This time, we're actually starting by the south, but we're actually attacking north, south, and center at the same time, simultaneously, with a very strong force. The chief of staff, the new one, Eyal Zamir, wants all the divisions to attack at the same time. He wants to rely much more also on the ground forces, presence of tanks, presence of infantry, not only on the airstrikes. So this is in the hope. As you say, a year and a half we've been putting that pressure, military pressure. We haven't obtained anything. This time we're trying to put more pressure. I do not understand why it's so gradual, because I know that the chief of general staff of the IDF would have liked to have, as I said now, a very huge strike with 4 divisions at the same time. The government is letting him intensify his action, but it's not as much as he would like. What he would call military pressure. We see that right now the military pressure is not working. The second difference from the beginning of the war is what we just saw now. Different setup in Gaza itself on the Palestinian side this time, with the demonstrations that are very, very brave. You have to be very brave to demonstrate in Gaza. It's like you demonstrate in Istanbul or in Tehran, right? You're going to be arrested, you're going to be tortured by the Hamas. To add to this popular discontent, we have something that's new that we could try and put some oil on that fire. Is the mafia, the local mafia, is at odds with the Hamas nowadays. There have been quite violent incidents between what you call the mafia families of Gaza and the Hamas that also could be exploited. The Hamas is losing a lot of popularity.
All right, I want to ask you, though, about what this sort of intensified military operation that we're looking at right now, and that the new IDF chief of staff wants to see. What does that mean for Israeli soldiers on the ground, if we're going to have more soldiers on the ground, more active fighting? And what does it mean for the Palestinian population?
So, first of all, at this stage, if we have to believe what the government is telling us, this operation will enhance the security by creating buffer zones, which we didn't have before. They're going to be like a kind of a belt around Gaza, like a big buffer zone all around Gaza, but also pockets inside Gaza that will ensure that the IDF can control the security problem. That should appease the military part of the activity, so that should also be more security for the Palestinians themselves. Now, concerning our soldiers, they are again going into a war that they do not believe as much as the first time. We have to understand the motivation the first time was to liberate hostages. First of all, the motivation today is still to liberate hostages, certainly not to create buffer zones and to go and create a new axis, this new Morag axis. We're not doing a Philadelphia, now it's Morag. The motivation is not there. Most reservists are not really enthused into going back into action because they do not feel, they do not believe. I'm also skeptical. I mean, everybody is calling everybody's bluff right now on both sides. But I'm skeptical about the problem if it will really help to liberate the hostages. Maybe it would have been better to continue with the bad diplomatic, the bad agreement, but give it a chance.
And on that note, exactly, in response to the decision to expand the military operation and capture land in Gaza, the hostages and missing families forum say that they're horrified. Instead of securing the release of the hostages with a deal, they say the government is sacrificing the hostages for the sake of territorial gains. And we go now to our I-24 News correspondent, Robert Swift, who's with us from Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. Robert, what is the latest we've heard from the families of the hostages on this?
That's right. The families have expressed their concern that that territory is being sought in exchange for the lives of the hostages. The statement that the Families Forum put out earlier today, they said they reminded the government that, in their words, it has an obligation to bring back all 59 hostages. That's both those living and those dead. They went on to say their lives hang in the balance as more and more disturbing details continue to emerge about the horrific conditions they're being held in, chained, abused, and in desperate need of medical attention. Now, the Families Forum finished that statement by making an appeal both to US President Donald Trump and to the mediating countries. They didn't name them, but presumably that is to Qatar and Egypt, who have been a central part of the hostage negotiation. And they asked that both those mediating countries and President Trump apply additional pressure to Hamas. Now, since that statement went out, we've heard from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, where he talked about how the IDF was changing gears, was going into Gaza and seizing additional territory. And he said that Israel will continue to keep ratcheting up the pressure on Hamas as long as they refuse to hand back the hostages.
All right, Robert Swift, thank you very much for your update. And you mentioned Egypt. Without giving too much detail, or really any detail at all, U.S. President Donald Trump announced that he had a positive conversation with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi on the phone. He said the call went very well and that the two discussed issues, including Gaza and the U.S. attacks on Yemen. Now, joining us to break this down is Dalia Ziana, an Egyptian scholar and senior fellow at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us this evening once again. So, hearing what Trump said about the call, what do you expect has actually been discussed and said here?
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I'll tell you not only what I expect, but what I've also heard behind the closed doors from people who are close to the decision makers in Egypt, whom I trust. So the call is mainly was not about Gaza as much as it was about the Houthis and the Horn of Africa. It seems that President Trump is now trying to find other locations where he can have attacks on the Houthis without getting Arab countries involved. I mean by that, Arab Gulf countries in particular, who we've also heard yesterday and the day before that they made sent indirect messages to the Houthis that we are not going to open our country to be used by American troops to attack you. Of course, they are saying this not because they love the Houthis. Of course, they know the Houthis are their enemies, but they don't want to be under the attack of the Houthis or the attack of Iran because they are allowing the American troops to operate from their lands. So right now, the American troops or the American strategy to attack the Houthis need a different platform to attack from. And the easiest and the closest geographic platform is the Horn of Africa. Both Egypt and the United States have a military presence in the Horn of Africa, particularly in Somalia. The U.S. has been there for many, many years. It has a base there. And this base is basically fighting against terrorism of the Somali terrorist organizations and the organizations wreaking havoc in North Africa, in the Horn of Africa, I'm sorry. Right. But also Egypt recently sent troops in January in particular to Somalia, if you remember, more than 1,000 troops within the African Union support and stabilization mission. And of course, Egypt had other intentions from sending these troops. Part of it has to do with the crisis we have with Ethiopia over the Nile River. But actually now it seems that these troops, the Egyptian troops, in cooperation with perhaps the American troops, perhaps they are going to coordinate on the attacks or enhancing the American attacks on the Houthis somehow. Also, Egypt has played a role before in intercepting the missiles fired by the Houthis on the Red Sea, either the ones that were directed at Egyptian land or at Israeli land, because at the end of the day, two neighbors are, their security is so interdependent.
Right. So, okay, we've got a variety of issues here. We've got the Horn of Africa, we've got the Houthis. But if you look at the relationship between Cairo and Washington recently, it's had a few bumps, especially since the new administration. Let's put it that way. How would you describe the relationship as it is right now, especially with the focus on Gaza?
It's a good point you mentioned, because actually I think it is kind of mouse and cat relationship. It's kind of a love-hate relationship. Of course, President El-Sisi, when President Trump came in power, he was one of the first to congratulate him, and he was expecting that he's going to bring or allow somehow the Egyptian leadership to do some things that the Biden administration did not allow them to do. Especially when it comes, to issues related to Gaza and going away with what is the situation in Gaza. But of course, there is, right now we can see very diverse visions, divergent, I would say, very different visions between the U.S. administration and the Egyptian political leadership over Gaza and over what should be happening in Gaza. And thus, they have their disagreement in this regard, and it will continue to be the case. However, today, something really interesting happened in the Egyptian media following the phone calls that happened yesterday between President Trump and President El-Sisi. They changed the language they are using, describing the people in Gaza. Before, the word used was the Palestinian citizens in Gaza, Al-Muwatin al-Falastini. Now they are using the word Al-Muwatin al-Ghazawi, the Gazan citizen, which is, I find it very, very interesting, because it seems to me perhaps it could be one step towards isolating Gazans from the Palestinian cause, which Egypt is very much concerned with for ideological reasons. And so they can easily, maybe this paves the way for the future. In the near future, we see Egypt saying that it's okay to take the Gazans out, and this will not hurt the Palestinian cause. This is my guess, my expectation. Yeah.
All right, Dalia Ziada, thank you so much for your input and for this interesting twist here at the end. We're going to be watching that, of course.
Thank you.
Now, tensions between the U.S. and Iran have been rising, and so has the fear of military conflict. Trump says he'd like a deal on Iran's nuclear program. Tehran has refused to talk to Washington. But according to the newspaper Axios, the White House is now seriously considering an Iranian proposal for indirect talks on the nuclear issue. This as the U.S. continues to boost its forces in the Middle East, just in case. Now, the complicated relationship between the U.S. and Iran goes back a long way and has often been marked by deep mistrust, fluctuating between cooperation and open hostility since the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Let's take a look back at some of the key moments in this relationship. There's more in this report.
In 1953, the United States helped orchestrate the overthrow of Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, reinstating the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who had close ties with the West. Fast forward to 1967, the U.S. provided Iran with a nuclear reactor and enriched uranium. Iran would sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968, promising not to pursue military nuclear capabilities. Relations remained strong in the 1970s. U.S. President Richard Nixon visited Tehran, cementing security ties and establishing Iran and Saudi Arabia as the twin pillars of U.S. Middle East strategy. Everything changed in 1979. Iran's Islamic Revolution forced the Shah into exile, and Ayatollah Khomeini returned to lead the country. Iranian students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, holding 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. By 1980, the U.S. had severed diplomatic ties, seized Iranian assets, and imposed severe trade restrictions. In 1983, Hezbollah, backed by Iran, launched a bombing attack on the U.S. Embassy and Marine barracks in Lebanon, killing 300 people. Despite the hostility, the Reagan administration secretly sold arms to Tehran in the 80s, and in 1988, a U.S. Navy warship mistakenly shot down an Iranian civilian plane, killing 290 people. In 2002, President George W. Bush labeled Iran part of the axis of evil. Tensions escalated, with accusations that Iran was developing nuclear weapons in secret. Following the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, Iran-backed militias launched attacks on American forces. In 2011, the U.S. uncovered an Iranian plot to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to Washington. In 2013, President Hassan Rouhani was elected, promising better relations with the world. In 2015, Iran and 6 world powers, including the U.S., reached a nuclear deal aimed at curbing Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. However, in 2018, President Donald Trump pulled the U.S. out of the nuclear deal, reimposing harsh sanctions. Relations hit a new low in 2020 when the U.S. killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, leading to missile strikes from Iran on U.S. military bases in Iraq. In 2022, massive anti-regime protests erupted in Iran, leading to U.S. sanctions against officials involved in the crackdown. By 2023, the U.S. and Iran engaged in a prisoner swap, signaling a small thaw in relations. Yet, in October 2023, the conflict escalated once again, as Iran-backed Hamas launched a deadly attack on Israel, with Iran's allies in Hezbollah and Yemen's Houthi group joining in. Israel retaliated, and the U.S. intervened to help shoot down Iranian missiles targeting Israel. As tensions continue to mount, U.S. President Donald Trump has warned Iran that failure to reach a nuclear agreement could lead to military action, a threat Iran has responded to with defiance, warning of severe retaliation. The complex, tumultuous history between the U.S. and Iran is far from over. As the region remains volatile, the question remains, can diplomacy prevail, or is this rivalry doomed to persist for generations?
And we go back to the studio with Rafael Yerushalmi. Let me start by asking you, Trump has given a 2-month deadline to Iran to reach a deal, but we don't know if that clock has started ticking or when it did. How serious is this threat right now?
First of all, I'm surprised that Donald Trump is thinking of an agreement, a negotiated agreement with the Iranians, because he was against any agreement to start with. Now he's okay with an agreement. He seems to hesitate. On the other hand, he has been disappointed by his relationship with Putin. And the fact that he's not so keen about the Russian policies might entice him to be tougher with Iran. He was sparing Iran a little to spare Moscow and Putin because of the interest and because of the missiles that the Iranians provide to the Russians. Now he's very, very close. As I said before, everybody is calling everybody's bluff in the Middle East. Here too, everybody is bluffing and everybody is calling everybody's bluff. I think the Iranians are bluffing
here.
The Iranians are bluffing because they're in no position to attack the United States of America, even if the troops are far from home.
Right, but it's Trump.
But Trump is in a position to attack the Iranians. He has that power. He has the Israelis on his side. He has the intel. He would know exactly, the Americans would know exactly what targets to hit. They could do it. They are on the brink of doing it if necessary. It is very dangerous because of that. The Iranians might call that bluff, and then Trump might not be able to get down the tree and have to attack. So right now, he's been a bit happy that the Iranians came up with this proposal of indirect talks, which can take ages, as we know, diplomatic ballet that will. But meanwhile, the Iranians are reaching the nuclear facility, military might that they want, and it is very, very dangerous. Now we'll see if Trump can hold the Israelis in check.
I want to ask you what a military conflict with Iran could look like, and also what Israel's role would be. Would it be in it from the beginning? What are we looking at?
I believe that would it be started by the initiative of the Americans, Washington would ask the Israelis to stay put. I don't think they would like the Israelis to get involved. Because they would want to have a control, and they would love to have a very short, strong strike from the start. And I think it will be just at first, but maybe the B-52s will come and just bomb one place. And the Iranians might just say, okay, let's stop there. I mean, a big, strong strike at first to see the Iranians will say, please stop. And if the Iranians don't say, please stop, then the Americans do have that power. They have the targets that they have to hit, very specific targets that will neutralize very quickly the Iranian military capacity. It's a no-brainer for the Americans, and that's why they do not even need the Israeli help, only the intel that the Israeli have.
All right, so we've got the threats from U.S. President Donald Trump that could very well actually happen.
It could happen.
All right, we have to go out now for a short break, but there's lots more to unpack when we come back, including the U.S. beefing up its military in the region, a continuation of our conversation right now. This and more when we're back in just a few minutes.
Dance, music, and magic immerse you in the story of Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem, an unforgettable musical where the past and present meet. Welcome to the heart of the most sought-after city in the world. A unique experience only at Kikar HaMusika. Reserve now at thisisjerusalem.co.il.
Bad posture. The ever-increasing hours we spend sitting, working, and even while trying to relax at home is twisting our vertebrae out of alignment and creating strain and pain on muscles, ligaments, and joints. A scientifically designed spine and back support device that uses precision biometric technology to perfectly align the back and spine for all-day comfort and support, creating perfect posture for your back every time you sit down. now features extra-wide acupressure comfort pads, as well as an extended height back panel for even more support, making it perfect for all body types. Also features a precision wing design that perfectly cradles your back and spine with amazing ergonomic support that leaves you feeling refreshed and energized even after sitting all day.
Welcome back to Middle East Now. I'm Bianca Zanini. The U.S. is boosting its military presence in the Middle East. We discussed this in the first part of the show, and we'll go even deeper now. The latest development is that the Pentagon will be deploying a second U.S. aircraft to the region, the Carl Vinson. Now, joining us live from Washington is senior Washington correspondent Mike Wagenheim. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. Is this a surprising move?
Apologize for the wind out here. Not so much a surprising move. The U.S. has, expended an immense amount of resources into the Middle East during the course of the Israel-Hamas war, and given what's going on right now with the U.S. battles against the Houthis, not all that surprising that they would devote another aircraft carrier to the region here. It certainly has implications. The Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier has been in the region for quite some time now. As you mentioned, the Carl Vinson moving in as well. The Pentagon says, listen, we got to have additional resources here. We want to make sure that the troops that are already in the region are being protected, that they have reinforcements, that we can do essentially more in terms of taking care of the Houthi threat. And Donald Trump tweeting or truth socialing, however you want to term it, yesterday that, listen, as long as the Houthis continue to shoot at us, we're going to continue to shoot at them. And now backing it up here with more military firepower. There's certainly no shortage of options for the U.S. militarily. They're also moving another aircraft carrier into the Central Command area of responsibility, though more toward the Pacific. But the ability here, even with these large aircraft carriers, to interchange them, essentially moving parts around the Middle East and the Pacific right now for the U.S. military to ensure that the region is protected to the extent that they can.
All right, and if we look at it sort of on a bigger picture, you mentioned the Houthis, but given the intensified rhetoric lately, also with Iran, how big of a deal is this? What is it signaling?
To some extent, it signals that the U.S., like a lot of the world right now, including Israel and others, are finding out that, the pirates that they thought would be so expendable and could be easily taken care of, they don't go down so easily. And I think this is a step in that direction. It's at least a recognition of the fact that even, a significant amount of U.S. firepower can't knock the Houthis out in one fell swoop or even over the course of a month, that it's going to take additional firepower. It's also a message to Iran in some form or fashion that, listen, we are going to do whatever is necessary, whatever we need to do. We need to burn the whole thing down in order to make sure that we are living up to our word here. And if you challenge us, you're going to be taken care of, essentially, in one form or fashion. So shalom Hamas, shalom to the Houthis, shalom to Iran. Whoever Donald Trump wants to take shalom to, he's going to back it up with the full force of the U.S. military.
All right, Mike Wagenheim, thank you so much joining us live from Washington. And back in the studio, the U.S. has long had a presence here in the Middle East, of course. How much of an escalation is this move? Or is it just showing that they could if they would?
Yes, it's standard procedure to mass troops to impress the enemy. Sun Tzu, the ancestors of military strategy, always said the biggest victory you can have in a war is not to start it, is to discourage your enemy from starting that war. So here is, of course, an impressive show of force, telling the Iranians you're not in a position to attack us. Just accept what we want with the nuclear agreement, and we will not. It's just a signal that is sent to the enemy. You do not need that much force, as I said, to strike Iran. The strike that is at first is a few targets that will neutralize. It will be like facilities like the electrical facilities. It will be the anti-aircraft facilities, and after that Iran cannot do anything. It's paralyzed. So you do not need that much firepower. The presence, of course, is also a message to the other superpowers, and especially to the Chinese, who are right now very busy with a very impressive naval maneuver near Taiwan. So in that ocean, people are it's getting a bit crowded down there. It's still kind of a bluff also, because you do not need so many planes and so many aircraft carriers, and they just hope it will convince the Iranians to stop. As was said in Washington right now, it's true that even for the Houthis, which compared to Iran is a small force, it will take a long time to get rid of them. And my question is, and this it will be really a test case, what happens is, and it could very well happen, when a missile coming from the Houthis hit an American vessel, and there are dead American soldiers. What will happen then with the Trump administration? What will they do? Because so far, so good, and we hope it will stay that way, but it might very well happen that American soldiers and officers will be killed by a missile. What does it entail politically after that in Washington?
Absolutely.
How will the administration react?
Now, let me ask you, we're seeing this beefing up of a military presence, the warnings and escalating rhetorics that if we want to, we will attack. And there are some echoes to what we saw with Putin and Russia when he said that he was going to invade Ukraine, and nobody really took it seriously. Is it being taken seriously enough here in the Middle East?
Yes, I believe so. I think with Donald Trump in power in Washington today, you can believe him. Like he's able to do things that maybe other presidents might hesitate much more doing. So he has this kind of attitude or mentality. I'm not a psychologist, but Donald Trump has this policy of like doing things that might surprise and might shake the world. I don't think Biden would have been so fast into putting all this military pressure on Iran, for instance. He would have been more careful. But this is what has also an effect on the enemy. The Iranians know that Donald Trump, being Donald Trump, he can really decide to start a war or not. I mean, at first, Donald Trump, when he started his
the wild card element here is the wild card element of Trump.
Yes, the wild card. But when he started, he was more like aiming at the Nobel Peace Prize, right? He was going to do the Pax Americana all over the world. And right now, it seems he's going to attack the whole world. He's going to attack Panama, Greenland, Iran.
Denmark,
it seems like, Denmark. So it's very impressive. But he's still giving, even though we're saying all this, he's still leaving a door open somewhere for diplomatic solution. So, like what we're doing in Gaza, what he's doing in Iran, only the future will tell if it works or if it doesn't work.
Peace through strength, right? At the end of the day, it's pressure.
If you ask me as a military expert, when we say in the Middle East, strengths, that's what prevails. People only understand strengths. I will tell you it's worldwide. People only understand strengths today in the world. Unfortunately, you might regret it on a moral point of view, but if you have the might and if you have the power, then people will respect you, people will go with it. And if you don't have it, they will do what they want. And wherever the might is not there on the right side, of course, of the side of our values, then it's only the bad, the evil that prevails. That's the problem. The democracies today, the good people have to be strong. They have to be very, very strong, because the forces of evil opposite are getting stronger and stronger and mightier. So we have to be tough, even though we don't want to be. Like we said, we are forced to go into this war. We're forced to show a muscle, but we have to do it.
Right. All right. As Damascus works to rebuild not only its infrastructure, but also its military capabilities, Turkey has stepped into the security vacuum left by Russia and Iran. Now, the latest steps by Ankara are reportedly to secure a strategic airbase in the center of the country, an airbase often targeted by the IDF in recent months. Alex Schloss reports.
As Turkey expands its footprint in Syria with the ascent of Turkish-backed militia to power in Damascus, Ankara is now forging ahead, not only with its diplomatic sway in the country, but also its military presence. According to recent reports, Turkey has started taking control of Syria's strategic Tayas air base, more commonly referred to as the T4 airbase in central Syria. Ankara and Damascus have been negotiating a defense agreement since December, following the ouster of the Assad regime, although Turkish officials had previously downplayed the possibility of an expanded military presence in Syria, describing such plans as premature. Turkey has vowed to step in to secure camps housing ISIS-affiliated prisoners and combat the resurgence of the group.
Since ISIS does not harm one country but many countries at the same time, since it operates in many countries, even if a single country puts up a fight on its own and removes the threat from itself, it does not eliminate the threat. Therefore, it was important for the countries in the region to come together and establish a strong platform. And now, we have taken an important step in establishing this platform.
Meanwhile, in Syria's northeastern Kurdistan region, residents have expressed concerns over an expanded Turkish military presence, despite recent steps towards reconciliation between Ankara, Damascus, and Kurdish militia. Israel has regularly targeted Syrian military installations since the Assad government collapsed in December, with a recent surge in operations around T4.
The IDF has been operating in Syria in recent days to strike and destroy strategic capabilities that threaten the state of Israel. The Navy operated last night to destroy the Syrian fleet, and with great success. I hereby warn the rebel leaders in Syria. Whoever follows Assad's path will end up like Assad. We will not allow an extremist Islamic terrorist entity to act against Israel across its border, and at the risk of its citizens, we will do everything necessary to remove the threat.
With Turkey stepping into the void left by Russia, it will likely make Israel think twice before striking facilities stationed by Turkish hardware and forces.
All right, so for Turkey, this would be a major gain. For Israel, how worried should the government be?
Very worried. We just said that the Iranians were weakened and they were less of a threat for Israel, but the Turks, they are not weakened. They are very, very, very strong and powerful army, more modern than the Iranian army, better equipped, especially for the Air Force. Their Air Force is a good Air Force, partly thanks to Israel, thanks to us, because when we had good ties with them, we gave them good equipment. It's very dangerous because the T4 base used to be at the end of the Assad regime, at the hands of the Assad regime, and the Iranians. It was really a dangerous base for us because of the Iranians there. This T4 is important for the air defense of Syria. When the IDF wants to strike serenely, let's say, over the Syrian territory, they have to make sure they neutralize the defense systems at T4. It helps us operate much better. And if this T4 falls into the hands of the Turks, who are very well equipped, who are very better trained, the Syrian army, for instance, they didn't really know how to use the Russian equipment, the famous S-300 missiles. So, but the Turks, they do. So it's very, very dangerous. It's a huge army. We have one little hope, and I'll finish with that, one little hope that we might be able to pour some oil on the fire between Iran and Turkey. What would be nice for us is, of course, a Turkish-Iranian war.
All right, but let me ask you though, the relationship, excuse me, that Israel has with Iran is not the same that Israel has with Turkey. I mean, despite the tensions that exist right now, we're not an open enemies, Israel and Turkey. So that makes a difference.
It does make a difference, but...
so it's a potential danger, but it's not an immediate danger.
Well, the danger is there because the dream of Erdogan has changed. He's not the same Erdogan that we had the good relationship. We had very, very good years with the Turks and with Erdogan. But right now we are assisting that Erdogan's lost it. I mean, he's become completely nuts. let's just put it that way. Completely nuts, and he's a tyrant. And he's a very dangerous man. What made me laugh...
He's certainly critic of...
No, but it was very funny to see the representative of Turkey saying that they're coming like justice makers to fight ISIS. But right now, I think Erdogan is much more dangerous than ISIS. He's become obsessed with jihad. He's become obsessed with rebuilding the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire includes Israel, right?
Expansionist dreams.
That includes us. So it's very, very dangerous because of the power that he has, military, but also the power that he has politically. He's like a dictator. He's a one-man show. He can decide what even, and it seems that the army is obeying him because sometimes the Turkish army rebels against the government. Many a time, the Turkish army has changed the policies of Turkey. And surprisingly enough, they are on his side.
It doesn't seem to be the case, yeah. All right, Rafael Yerushalmi, thank you so much for joining us throughout the show this evening. We really appreciate it. Now, Syria is facing challenges on many fronts, and now the country has been hit with a nationwide power outage due to malfunctions in the national grid. The Ministry of Energy has said that they're addressing the issues that struck Tuesday night. Earlier today, power returned to the provinces of Homs, Hama, and Tartus. Still, in many areas, state-supplied electricity is only available for a few hours a day. Now, Syria used to get the majority of its oil for power generation from Iran. Now, since the fall of Assad, that's been cut off. And the government is instead looking for other solutions. And with us now to break this down is Badr Khan Ahmed, a reporter in Syria. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Tell us about this nationwide blackout. Why did it happen and how is the government handling it?
Well, I think this is not new to the Syrian people. For example, when I saw this news as a journalist first and second as a Syrian person who live in Syria, this is the problems with the electricity. It's not something unusual. We are facing these problems almost every day. For example, the areas of northeastern Syria, we haven't seen electricity since more than almost 1 year. Here we are depending on local generators that works on diesel. So we get the diesel from the local refineries in northeast Syria from the oil, and then we are using this diesel for a run and for turn on these generators in this area. So the main network of Syria is almost destroyed. But in other places in Syria, like Damascus, Aleppo, the south of Syria, I think they are getting now electricity between 2 to 4 hours per day. So I think this kind of problems has happened other times and in many different locations as well.
All right, so perhaps the story of the blackouts and lack of electricity is not new, but perhaps the reason for it is different than it was a few months ago. What is the main issue here?
Sorry, I didn't get your question.
I asked you, what is the main issue affecting these blackouts? Is it the lack of oil imports from Iran? Are the Syrians getting it from Jordan? Is it because of airstrikes that have damaged the grid? What are the main issues facing the electricity here?
I think the main issue is not connected with the strikes in Syria, because the problem is that Syria need to rehabilitate the electricity networks in different places in Syria, and also because before, during the Al-Assad time, Syria was getting oil from Iran, and that was helping for produce electricity to the people. So now, for example, what you watch on the TV now, the oil fields in northeast Syria, these oil fields are already destroyed before by the Turkish strikes. So they are almost destroyed, the stations of the oil and gas. I think the first thing that for manage to bring back the electricity again to Syria's normal time, these stations like gas and oil has to rehabilitate and be fixed again with the new government in Syria. This first, and second, I think also the sanctions on Syria is affecting specifically the sanctions on the power and the what is regarding like oil, gas, and electricity. So when these are getting fixed, I think the Syrian people will get electricity again as normal like before.
All right, Badr Khan Ahmed, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
And shifting gears, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is on a 3-day visit to Moscow, and on the agenda is Iran's nuclear program. He spoke with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, about Tehran, and also discussed the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Wang also met with President Putin on the trip aimed at further deepening the growing cooperation between the two giants. Now, as the Jewish holiday of Passover approaches, the biannual cleaning of notes in the... All right, we have our guest, Clarice. I am very happy to say that. Joining the program now is Clarice Witte, founder and executive director of the Signal Group. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I thought we didn't have you, so I'm very glad that we were able to connect with you. The two countries, China and Russia, have described their relationship as one with no limits. How strong are their ties, really?
This is the question of the hour. I think we've seen that there is a marriage of convenience. On a values level, if you can even go in that direction, with two powers such as Russia and China, they differ. China very much wants to evolve the current order in a way that suits China, whereas we see Putin's really willing to turn the table over. So there are limits up to a point, but that point goes a long way. And there are many areas where these two countries are benefiting from each other's support and agreement and this show of force together. And the United States, of course, is working to maybe move the needle on Russia's commitment to China.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about Iran as well in this. Both Russia and China have criticized Trump's threats against Iran. The three held meetings last month. We see these growing ties between them, but is there much weight behind their words? We know that there's not any interest in getting any engagement militarily. What is the weight behind this criticism of the U.S. and the support to Iran?
Rhetorically, they get a lot of benefit. They sound like they are for peace and for mutual respect. This is the terminology certainly that China continuously uses. Russia has definitely picked up on it. And they're positioning themselves to look like the stable leaders of the country, whereas Trump seems to appear to be erratic and very changeable in his policies, and certainly willing to make major moves in ways that we haven't seen before. What is actually behind it, neither Putin nor President Xi would like to see Iran with nuclear military capability. So I think they agree with America on that. And if America is going to put pressure on Iran in any meaningful way, then the Chinese and the Russians can just benefit from sounding like they are the torch holders for peace and stability, where in fact it's the U.S. position that is going to make the stable potential for the region, backing Israel and encouraging Iran with a real threat of military action. Because without that kind of threat, we know Iran just continues on its path to increase its capability of turning nuclear overnight.
So in what ways would you say that the Western world should be keeping an eye on Russia and China's growing ties and their support of Iran?
Russia is going to use the U.S. interest in pulling it away from China to its benefit. The U.S. is going to have to be very savvy in playing that game. I think bringing in Saudi Arabia was clever. Having the Putin and Zelensky meetings, the separate meetings that the U.S. had being held in Saudi Arabia, that was really sort of pulled out of a hat and quite interesting. And I think it has implications for what the United States is trying to do with the Gulf. And that has great impact in the Indo-Pacific and in China, because so much of that energy of those countries is sourced in the Gulf. So I think that them working towards collaboration and how they treat Iran is sort of the sideshow. I know that that's where everyone's eyes are, but I think that what's happening in and around that might be much more significant with respect to creating significant changes that can lead to regional stability.
All right, and just shortly, very shortly here, because we're running out of time, what is Iran's? What should Iran be looking for here from these two?
Well, Iran, I think, knows it's going to get the rhetorical support, and perhaps that kind of cover will give it enough leeway to hold its own for a while going forward. But a lot depends on what Israel and the U.S. decide to do.
All right, Carice, thank you so much for joining us. I was happy that we were able to get through to you. Now, that is all for this edition of Middle East Now. But don't worry, we'll be back tomorrow with more news and analysis from Israel and the Middle East. Stay tuned for the rundown coming up next.
Dance, music, and magic immerse you in the story of Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem, an unforgettable musical where the past and present meet. Welcome to the heart of the most sought-after city in the world. A unique experience only at Kikar HaMusika. Reserve now at thisisjerusalem.co.il.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are? Introducing i24 News' brand new news website. On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News app today.
How do you get your news? How do you know what sources to trust? And to paint a clear picture of the entire story, you need a breakdown of the constant stream of events, top stories, expert analysts, and the best journalists bringing you real voices on the ground. We're breaking it all down on The Rundown. Get the facts, stay informed, and be a voice of reason for the Middle East.
Introducing the brand new i24 News Video On Demand app. You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions and expert commentary, all at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News Video On Demand app today.
The Israeli military deepens its push into the Gaza Strip. As the offensive builds momentum against Hamas and other armed terror groups, we'll look at all the latest. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu heads to Hungary, where he's set to meet with Prime Minister Orban in open defiance of the Standing International Criminal Court arrest warrant surrounding the ongoing war in Gaza. And the Israeli team from Camrotech is the first international group at the site of the earthquake in Thailand, bringing their breakthrough technology leading to the rescue of the first survivor. Welcome to I-24 News and the rundown this hour, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. I'm David Matlin. Thanks for joining us now. A lot to get to today. We begin as Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz. He says that the army has been ordered to, quote, capture extensive territory that will be added to the state of Israel's security zones, close quote. Now, since the resumption of ground operations in the Strip, Katz has provided probably the best indications as to where the current IDF operation is headed. On the heels of mass evacuation orders this week, he's called on Gazans to, quote, act now to overthrow Hamas and return all the hostages, close quote. He also announced that Israel's expanding operations in Gaza, as we can see, following extensive overnight strikes in the southern part of the enclave. Now, the Israel Defense Force deployed another division to the region earlier today, again highlighting the growing offensive against Hamas at this point. That's where we go first here, down to the southern border region around Gaza. Our correspondent Balir Sladin standing by there tonight. First of all, Balir, IDF troops deepening their drive into Rafiah, into the southern part of Gaza. Let's start there. What do we know about what's taking place there?
Yes, interesting developments today, and we've just heard the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, talking about a new corridor that Israel is operating in, a corridor Murag or Murag Access, which is north of the Philadelphia corridor. And two sources in Gaza Strip told I-24 News just a short while ago that there is actually no way to move between the southern part of the Gaza Strip, Rafah, and Khan Yunis. They are completely divided right now. There is no entry to the southern part or to the people that are in the southern part back to the north, and it's not clear whether there are still civilians in Rafah or not. We know that the IDF had called on the people there for 2 consecutive days to evacuate as soon as possible. So for now, there is no movement between these two parts. And if we want to add up all the territories that the IDF is actually controlling inside the Gaza Strip, the new Murag Access and the Philadelphia corridor, as well as the perimeter, and of course the Netzarim corridor in the north, it is 30% of the overall territory of the Gaza Strip. And apparently this is, as the defense minister has said, as you have mentioned, in order to pressure Hamas taking on more and more territory from the Gaza Strip. There has been some talk over the past few weeks of even annexing these territories to Israel, but apparently that's not the case right now. It's only added to the security zones for Israel, again, in order to pressure the Gazans, to pressure Hamas to accept the current Witkoff plan, the current Witkoff proposal that is on the table, and release as many hostages as possible. So we see that this is happening while the airstrikes are continuing. Today, an airstrikes in Deir al-Balah killed a few of Hamas's policemen, and also in Jabalia, where an UNRWA clinic has been hit by an airstrike. According to the Palestinians, about 20 people were killed. Some of them are women and children. The IDF is saying that that was actually a command center for Hamas's operatives and other Palestinian factions. They have used that building in order to carry out and plan attacks against Israeli troops inside the Gaza Strips, and of course against the Israeli towns that surround the Gaza Strip. So we see that the operation is continuing on the ground, and of course from the sea and from the air as well.
Yeah, I would say certainly in terms of this territory that the defense minister is talking about seizing here, annexation would seem extremely unlikely. I mean, Israel hasn't even annexed the West Bank. So security zones, though, yes, we see that model on other fronts around the country. But on another major story that we've been following so closely for so many days in a row there, these demonstrations taking place inside the Gaza Strip against Hamas rule. Look, you mentioned Deir al-Balah, where the IDF hit a Hamas squad there. There was an extrajudicial killing, we'll call it that, of a Hamas operative in Deir al-Balah by local clans, all filmed. That came out yesterday. I know this was a major topic we covered. But are we seeing more signs of Hamas losing its iron grip on violence in Gaza?
Well, definitely. You've mentioned the execution yesterday of a Hamas operative by the clans there, and it was because they have, or actually the Hamas policeman himself killed one of the members of that clan, one of the young people there. And today that happened again in El Shaja'iyya, another incident. It's not clear whether that's related to the protest or not, but if we're talking about the protest today, after a few days of a pause, let's call it, of protesting, the Gazans, especially in Beit Lahia and the northern part of the Gaza Strip, are taken to the street once again, and we're talking about thousands and maybe more, actually tens of thousands of people. They are calling loud and clear for Hamas to get out of the Gaza Strip. They are even using signs and singing against Hamas in this protest. So we see that it's not actually ending as we have thought. The crackdown that Hamas has done against those protesters is not getting them to stop. So the people of Beit Lahia, at least, are once again taken to the street and in large numbers to protest against Hamas and against the continuation of the war, of course. But of course, the calls against Hamas is the interesting part for now.
Balira, you basically already answered the question, but we're left questioning, where is this offensive headed? What appears to be the trajectory of this? For now, another division of the IDF, so thousands of soldiers, again, now committed to this offensive going on in there. More evacuation orders being given in various parts of the Strip, the north and the south. So at this point, it appears, by all indications, that there's a troop buildup, that we're going to see more territory taken?
Well, definitely. If we want to try to understand what's happening here, it's definitely not the hell that the Israeli Prime Minister and also the Defense Minister has been talking about. Definitely some development here to pressure Hamas to accept the current proposal. But the hell that they have been talking about, apparently it is absolutely much more than that. We're talking about 5 divisions that are planned to get inside the Gaza Strip once again and, of course, expand the ground operation that is still very, very limited. It's only in the southern part of the strip and the airstrikes only. So no actual troops are inside the many parts of the Gaza Strip. That's one way that we could see the things develop from here. And other thing that we have also seen reports about, it is the fact that the IDF now understands that there needs to be some sort of a split between the Gazan civilians and the other operatives that belong to Hamas. In order to do that, there has to be some sort of a zone, a humanitarian zone that only the unarmed people would be able to get into, with inspection, of course, with monitoring who gets inside this humanitarian zone. And after that, all the rest is going to be, of course, seen as one of Hamas's operatives or other Palestinian factions. These are the things that could be happening in the coming weeks. But apparently, Israel is still giving a chance for another hostage deal, another round of hostage release, at least the Witkoff proposal with 10 Israeli living hostages being released. That's, of course, going to make things much easier for Israel if it wants to advance more inside the Gaza Strip.
So far as the clashes have been relatively light. I know that injury reports low and so far no casualties to the Israeli forces. We'll stay updated here. Bolir Sladin, thanks for coming to us from the border region with Gaza. Bringing the discussion in the studio with us, we have diplomatic correspondent for Israel Hayom, familiar face with us, Ariel Kahana. Good to have you back in the studio. You know, from the circles you're in, Ariel, and the people you're talking to, I mean, the country, I think at large, is asking themselves, you know, why this offensive is taking place in Gaza exactly now. You know, what's the purpose of this right now? What's your best way of answering that for our international audience of what Israel's up to at this point in Gaza?
So not only internationally, also, as you said, inside, a lot of people are asking this question. So I want to remind you, David, when after the war broke out, Israel had 2 goals. The cabinet decision was first to eliminate Hamas, and secondly to bring the hostages back. Now, it doesn't mean what is the most what his priorities.
It's priority list, right?
Yeah, it's both. Yeah. Now, what Israel is focused now at this point of time is bringing back the hostages. Now, when you and I are talking, it's not about eliminating Hamas. The result of the new operation in Gaza, as we saw, could be influential in a way that it will help to eliminate Hamas in the future. But at this point of time, what Israel wants is to push Hamas, because Hamas is 2 weeks ago agreed just to bring Eidan Alexander back, actually as American citizen. Yeah. Israel wanted what we call the Witkoff plan, as your reporter said, and that is to have Eidan Alexander and, on top of that, an additional 10 hostages. So Hamas, after the war actually broke out again by Israel about 2 weeks ago, Hamas changed its position, and now they're saying they will give 5 people back. Israel still wants the 10 or 11, again with Alexander. So actually, the operation now, if you go to the bottom line, the big operation of the last 24 hours, the goal is to, let's say, convince Hamas to give, actually to go to the Witkoff plan and bring, on the first phase, 10 or even 11 hostages back to Israel. That is a goal, and we'll have to wait, I would say, 48, maybe 72 hours to see if that military pressure will make any change with Hamas' position.
I think some 21 hostages thought to be alive. I mean, is that the number?
Even more. Okay. Maybe even 22, 24. I mean, yeah.
It's an important batch, and obviously, you know, in the bodies of just so valuable to Israel. This being, you know, what I refer to as the last great strategic resource of Hamas right now. So many issues around there. Ariel, stay with us. I want to jump out to the streets of Tel Aviv here. Large demonstrations in solidarity with the Israeli hostages still in Gaza. Now, they've been active in the streets every day recently, and many of the families of those in captivity are expressing fear and outrage at the expanding IDF push into Gaza at this moment, seeing it as the government forsaking the plight of the hostages again. is being expressed with the megaphone on the streets here. But despite effort from Egypt recently to mediate some sort of breakthrough, we touched on the Witkoff plan, the White House still involved. We're not aware of any real traction on the issue of a negotiated hostage release. Of course, our correspondent Robert Swift has something more to give me. But Rob, let's start here. You're out in this area in Hostage Square. This has been really an epicenter for all this sentiment. You know, one of the important groups leading this is the Hostage Family Forum. Now, this is a group of families whose loved ones are being held in captivity there in unknown conditions. You know, what do their statements reflect today? What are we hearing from them?
Yeah, they released a statement early this morning following the statement from Defense Minister Israel Katz on the expansion of IDF operations inside Gaza. In their words, they were horrified at that decision. They specifically noted the decision by Katz to capture extensive territory. They singled this out. And they also said that the government had an obligation to return all 59 hostages, both those living and those dead. They said regarding the hostages, quote, their lives hang in the balance as more and more disturbing details continue to emerge about the horrific conditions they're being held in, chained, abused, and in desperate need of medical attention. Now, they went on to specifically ask US President Donald Trump and those countries involved in the mediating to apply additional pressure. I think this taps into the sentiment held by many Israelis that there's concern that this notion that military pressure will get the hostages out. That's certainly not a sentiment that much of the Israeli public believes in, particularly the Hostages Families Forum, it appears.
Rob, how do you know, a vague topic, but one that I think we're wrestling with. How do you describe the public mood at this point? You know, as we're looking at this offensive and the various perspectives around it meant to be leveraged, you know, what's happening with this? You know, how are you sensing the way this is impacting Israel, certainly at Hostage Square?
Yeah, look, there's definitely a strong amount of disunity within the Israeli public. Just this evening, the president was encouraging Israelis to remain unified. So by that, we can assume that he's concerned that they're not. There are plenty of Israelis that don't agree or that are certainly suspicious with the motivation behind the return to the IDF operation inside Gaza. If we look at polling, some of the most recent polling has said that 69% of Israelis support ending the war in exchange for the return of the hostages, with 21% of people opposed. Now, even among those who support one of the coalition parties that make up the government, 54% of those, so a majority, agree with the ending the war in exchange for the hostages, with 32% opposed to this. So the government does appear to have some of the Israeli public behind it, but by no means a majority as it strives forward with its military goals inside Gaza. And there are other peripheral issues which are triggering many of these protests. Today we saw protests in Jerusalem against it was in favour of universal drafting, essentially drafting the ultra-Orthodox. Yeah. We've seen protests in recent weeks regarding the firing of Shabak head Ronen Bar. These protests, they don't necessarily completely overlap, but many of them add momentum to each other, and they often have the same parts of the Israeli public backing them.
Well put, Rob. Yes, it's sometimes been hard to discern what's the central message in these demonstrations. There's a combination of a few of them bringing people out to the streets these days. Robert Swift in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, thanks for now. And with Ariel Kahana again in the studio here. Ariel, we may, be surprised or think that there would be better government coordination with the Hostage Family Forum, some sort of messaging to prevent them being in the streets, yelling about these issues. If there is traction, to the negotiations, that maybe they'd be informed. It's been a useful tool, in other words, for Hamas and the enemies to see the public reaction in Israel, to seize on that. What do you think? Is there real traction to the Witkoff plan here? That are there negotiations taking place right now?
First of all, there are negotiations at any point of time, including now. And I understand, of course, very much the worry by the families and so on. But the point is that there is actually, that's the way the government sees it, the Prime Minister sees it. There is no other way to push Hamas to any kind of agreement unless we can always surrender, But if we don't want to surrender, so we have to push them again by military force to go to such kind or any kind of a deal. That's the point. Now, the government, I want to tell you that because it's not known enough, in my opinion. The government or the representatives are in touch with every family. Okay. There is a special officer for every family who updates them about what's going on. He tells them, he talks with them, and so on. Now again, it would never be enough, because God forbid if a family member of you or me were kidnapped
until they're home, it doesn't matter. Right.
Exactly, it wouldn't matter never.
Yeah.
But and I guess no, it doesn't. Which government was in power, you would see demonstrations always. Because it's so painful for all of us. But at the same time, I do think the government takes actions, maybe not enough, maybe they could do better, I don't know. But to say that the government ignore from the families and so on, it's not accurate.
It's good to put that out there. Ariel, stay with us. Other topics coming your way here as we go. But on this subject, accepting the U.S. State Department's 2025 International Woman of Courage Award. This was released Gaza hostage survivor Amit Susana called for global action to secure the immediate release of the remaining captives in Gaza. It was a big stage for her to give that message. Now, our senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim sat down with Amit. He brings us more from her harrowing experience and how she's taking it to the international arena.
Amit Susana, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. There were so many heroes of October 7th, and your story seems to resonate more than just about anybody else's. Why do you think your story has made such a connection around the world?
I think because there was so much denial from the world and no support at all from the women organization about what happened on October 7th. And me coming out with my face, with my name, and telling in details of what happened to me in captivity, I think that made a huge difference, more than I ever imagined that it would. And me choosing to do so on the New York Times, people know that the New York Times is an objective platform and one not so supportive of Israel. So that's why I chose them to tell my story. And I presented them with medical evidence of what happened to me. And at first it really bothered me that they requested that, but afterwards I understood the importance of it. And I think my story starts with me fighting them in the field and showing bravery. And I was scared that by telling my story of what happened to me in captivity, the sexual violence I endured, that will take from my bravery. And I was glad to see that people saw me telling my story just as much power than in my battle in the fields.
This is such a deeply personal story for you. Does it get easier to tell it, or is it harder in some way knowing that you're speaking on behalf of the hostages that are still being held in Gaza?
I try to concentrate on my role and to concentrate on the other hostages, so not on myself. I think that's what makes it easier. But when sometimes I'm alone and I see what people say and the women organization, yeah, it hurts. Because I told in detail of what happened to me, and it's really a private story, as you mentioned. And before that, I never spoke about things like that in my life. I'm a private person. I keep to myself most of the time. And knowing that every person in Israel, when he looks at me, knows exactly what I've been through, it's not easy. But I just try to concentrate on my role and the other hostages.
You spoke about a moment ago about sometimes feeling alone, feeling isolated. Yesterday, you're surrounded by the Secretary of State, the First Lady. You look out into the crowd. There's Keith and Aviva Siegel, who you were held captive with. Does it give you a sense that maybe you're not alone in this?
Yeah, yesterday was really a powerful moment for me. Meeting Melania Trump, the First Lady, and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and them recognizing the horrors that happened in Israel on October 7th, and choosing me to talk on behalf of the women who received the Women of Courage Award. It was so meaningful for me, and I had no idea that Marco Rubio is going to talk about me and about Israel in his speech. And it just gave me a real sense of the urgency that the U.S. government and the people here in the United States feel about this entire conflict, and that we have their support in bringing this crisis to an end.
Did you get a chance to talk to the Secretary of State or any officials here about the situation and how you feel that the hostages need to be at the top of the list?
Unfortunately, no, we didn't get a chance, but I met with them prior to the ceremony, and we got a chance to shake hands, and I could see from their eyes and from the attention they give to me that this matter is of real importance to them.
The ceremony was yesterday, but that's not the end of this process. You're actually going to be involved in a leadership program, kind of an exchange program put on by the State Department. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I got the chance to meet some really brave women and hear their stories. And it was really emotional for me because sometimes you concentrate on your suffering, on what's going on in Israel, about the hostages, and you forget that the world suffers from so many different things. And these brave women fight in their country, and it's just like it give you a sense of the importance of this entire process. And it's really hard for me, like, to commit to something with such a tight schedule, but they're so supportive, and they're really they're really flexible with me. So I feel really honored to be part of this program.
There's going to come a time, God willing, when the hostages come home and the war is over. What's your future at that point? Have you even thought about beyond that?
And whenever I'm being asked of that question, I don't know what to say, but I think my future will be bright. I'm really optimistic. And I feel lucky that I'm here, that I made it, that I survived. And I think that now I'm more aware of my own strength. And I feel more confident speaking in public. That's one thing I never imagined that I will do. And I see a bright future for myself and for Israel. And I really hope it will be like that.
Well, I normally speak with politicians, so I don't say this often, but it's an honor to get a chance to talk with you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
Again, thanks to our senior correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, bringing that in. Meet that footage of her fighting back as she's being dragged into Gaza. That's strong. And Ariel with me in the studio here. I know that's incredible to see her bravery, her courage here then and now. So again, my shout out, thank you to Amit and Susanna for having the courage to represent this internationally and for everything she's done. But I know that footage had an impact on us watching it here in the studio, Ariel.
Yeah, I mean, what a hero. Yeah. What a hero this young lady is. After all what she was going through. And not only she's coming out, she's talking, she brings a lot of respect to Israel, to herself as an Israeli, as you said, as someone who fought this terrorist, the most horrible terrorist in the world.
Pack of armed guys.
And after all of that, she's optimistic. Really inspiring.
It's incredible and it's powerful. Again, I mean, thank you. My direct message there to her, keep up the fight, keep up what you're doing there. Appreciate that. We move on to some other news here of the day, though. Just released for publication today, the IDF and the Shin Bet intelligence here released the security summary for the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Typically, a time of elevated upheaval, especially given the ongoing war in Gaza. But in fact, this last Ramadan, which ended this week, was characterized by an 80% decrease in terror attacks carried out and thwarted compared to last year. Now, often, quiet does not make headlines, but it can be the most significant indicator of the status of a conflict and the apparent desire, if I go as far as this, to say that most West Bank and East Jerusalem Palestinians don't want to take up arms in this moment of heightened tension here. So stay tuned. Now, some 48 hours after announcing his decision to appoint the Israeli Navy's Vice Admiral Eli Sharvit as the next head of the Shin Bet, and then backtracking based on a lot of pressure from allies, both internal and external, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu officially ended that uncertainty, taking Sharvit off the list of candidates and appointing the current deputy head of the security agency as its acting chief instead of Ronen Bar, who the Prime Minister is tossing out. Now, Bar's firing remains frozen for the time being by some legal proceedings, but Netanyahu's office says he is continuing to interview candidates for the role and insists that Bar will be out of office. He didn't give a date. It's April 10th. We'll be right back after a short break here on The Rundown. Do stay with us. A lot more to get to here in the day's top stories. We'll be right back.
Now, more than ever, we are all joining forces at the front lines and the home front in medicine, technology, research and development with hope. And together strengthen the Negev. Ben-Gurion University, the University of the Negev.
Dance, music, and magic immerse you in the story of Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem, an unforgettable musical where the past and present meet. Welcome to the heart of the most sought-after city in the world. A unique experience only at Kikar HaMusika. Reserve now at thisisjerusalem.co.il.
Introducing the brand new i24 News Video On Demand app. You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions and expert commentary, all at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News Video On Demand app today. The 7th of October set in motion a chain of events. Today, Israel's enemies are severely weakened, but not defeated, and the balance of power is shifting. This region never rests. And for its own survival, Israel needs to keep its finger on the pulse. If you want to better understand, if you want to hear voices you won't hear elsewhere, then tune in daily to Middle East Now on i24 News.
Welcome back. You're watching The Rundown here on i24 News. If you're just joining us now, we begin looking at Prime Minister Netanyahu's first trip to Europe. That is since the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for him, and then Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. That was last year. Now, the Israeli premier will meet tomorrow with Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who in November rejected the ICC decision to seek Netanyahu's arrest and invited him to make this official visit without the fear of being detained. Now, in fact, Hungary is expected to announce during Netanyahu's visit that it is withdrawing from the International Criminal Court. So we'll stay tuned on the developments there. And with that, we have, again, Ariel Kahan, our diplomatic correspondent from Israel Hayom, in the studio. First of all, Ariel, how's it look? There's so many questions surrounding this visit right now. For Prime Minister to go straight to the arms of one of Europe's authoritarian strongmen at this moment right now. Why is he there? Why now? Is it all about Israel-Hungary ties, or is this about the ICC right now?
Well, it's all in all, and it's also personal ties between Netanyahu and Orban, which are going very, very long back, actually almost 30 years ago. Wow. The political story, David, is quite similar. It's interesting to analyze because both of them were in power, thrown out, came back, and so on. Very interesting. And they control their countries quite similarly, I would say.
There's been a lot said about that sort of Orban's built a bit of a model that many others are following, President Trump included, perhaps.
Correct. Some criticize this kind of democracy. Not for me to judge. What I can say is that Orban, I would say, is much more managed than Netanyahu. We see just in the last days so many scandals in Netanyahu's office, which you don't see with Orban office. But they share quite same worldview. Both of them are, of course, conservative, and so on. And let's say that as well, Netanyahu will enjoy once again a weekend, in this case in Budapest. It's not a coincidence. Since he came back to office more than 2 years ago, almost all of his trips abroad included weekends over there, wherever it was. I personally don't like it. But in any case, going to your question, yes, Hungary is expected to leave the ICC. That would be a great achievement for Israel and a strong hit to the ICC. That's one reason. And on top of that, Netanyahu wants to show the international community that he's not in jail in Israel, that he can fly to other countries, not only to America. So that would be the first. Let's see if there will be other countries in Europe.
Yeah, are there other countries? I mean, do we know about any future travel plans for the Prime Minister or not yet?
I don't know at this point of time. And it's quite, I would say, risky for him unless he has such a strong ally as Orban is. To go to countries which he could be arrested at this point of time, unless the ICC will withdraw from the arrest they took out. But let's see if that will happen.
Is it a certainty, in your opinion, that this ICC, that Hungary will that Orban will make this announcement, that he's going to disavow the ICC, step away? Is this really an expected part of this visit?
I would say yes. Okay. There were reports in Hungary, but on top of that, I was talking to some people here. My impression is it's going to happen. You are right that you always have to wait and see the formal announcement, see if it happens, it really happens. But that's the plan. Let's put it this way.
Interesting geopolitical moves by the Israeli premier, certainly by Orban himself as well. Ariel Kahana, thanks for being with us on a host of topics here so far. Thanks again for joining us on The Rundown. Now, in a story brought to us by our correspondent, Ariel Oseran. U.S. President Trump will meet Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara during his upcoming visit to Saudi Arabia. That's scheduled for mid-May, according to Syrian sources. The expected meeting was arranged through the personal mediation of the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, a figure we have trouble not talking about from week to week here. He's involved in so much international diplomacy. And Ariel Oseran joins us now, our Middle East correspondent. Ariel, the Saudis have really emerged as, I call it diplomatic powerhouse, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, U.S., Iran, Syria, Lebanon. Not an easy task. Now another dramatic breakthrough for the Saudis, getting the interim Syrian leader to sit with the U.S. president. What can you tell us?
I totally agree with you, David. Saudi Arabia is really emerging as the number one in not only regional but international mediator, really surpassing Qatar that has held that position in recent years. Basically, in his upcoming trip to Saudi Arabia, once again, the first foreign visit in his administration, his new administration, as he did in his first term, U.S. President Donald Trump expected when he visits Saudi Arabia in mid-May. Also, he will obviously meet with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, but also he is expected to meet with President al-Shara of Syria. This is according to a Syrian source. Now, as you mentioned, this meeting was set up by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Now, before we talk about the further implications and emerging role as mediator of Saudi Arabia, I think it's quite striking that you have this former al-Qaeda leader who is fighting U.S. coalition forces in Iraq, rising to prominence as president of Syria, now meeting with the American. At least this is what is expected. I think this is one hell of a character arc for Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara. And I know that there are many people who are looking forward and anticipating such a meeting, hoping that it will come true. Obviously, this will have major implications for Syria, top of mind for them, removing U.S. sanctions. I would imagine that is at least one of the many topics that would be discussed between the two leaders if they actually meet.
Yeah, well put, the character arc of al-Shara. I mean, who hasn't he fought over the last 15, 20 years in this arena? Remarkable, last decade, going up against all the other jihadis. This is an intriguing character, certainly. We'll stay tuned on any developments there. I want to pivot another aspect of Syria with you, Ariel, right now. Regional developments around the border activity. There's been a lot of alleged IDF strikes in Syria and unrest in various parts around the border. But the latest report saying that now Israel's shutting down the cross-border movement of Druze communities. This is something that's gone on for many years. In fact, even on this closed frontier with Syria, that the Druze themselves, who bridge the border, have always moved back and forth for various reasons. What's going on up there?
Right, David. Well, I mean, I have to say, since October 7th and Israel openly striking in Syria and then declaring it almost after every strike, we are no longer under this veil of secrecy. Israel has been striking
we can drop
military
the alleged
targets.
Okay.
Yeah. We can. All right.
Yeah.
Foreign sources alleged.
It's been a lot of years of alleged strikes, alleged booms in the night up there. There's been a lot of years of that. So yes, a new chapter in front of us. Okay.
Exactly, and everything that is unfolding is part of this new reality, not only in Syria but in the region. Now, what we can say is that there were plans, despite these ongoing Israeli strikes, there were plans to establish or deepen the ties between Israel and the Druze community in southern Syria. Israel gave them a big hug, and this is something that made them feel protected with sectarian tensions in Syria. But part of these efforts to go closer to the Druze community was to allow dozens of workers living in Syrian communities 5-10 kilometers away from the border to enter Israel and to work. The preparations were all set. According to the defense ministry, even they came in once or twice. But according to reporting, the political echelon decided to nix this deal, this agreement, at least for now. No entry of Druze workers into Israel. The understanding is that this is due to concerns that the vetting process complete, and it is showing some difficulties and challenges. But the idea itself was praised, supported by the Druze in mediation with the IDF, but for now it is being put on hold due to a political, not a security decision, but a political decision here in Israel.
We don't like to see strife with the Druze, Israel, Syria, and Lebanese, or anywhere, certainly from our perspective here. Ariel Oseret, thanks for being with us. A lot of moving pieces.
Thank you.
Now, Israel's National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, visited the Flashpoint Temple Mount, or Al-Aqsa compound, today, depending on who you're asking, after a nearly 2-week period of Ramadan during which access to the contested holy site was closed to Jews. Interestingly, Ben-Gvir's visit elicited criticism, sharp criticism, from within his governing coalition, as ultra-Orthodox lawmaker Moshe Gafni, significant player of his own, called the visit, quote, an attack on the sanctity of the holiest place for the Jewish people and on the status quo, close quote. So it seems a two-pronged approach there. Many of Israel's most devout communities consider it forbidden to tread in the holy site due to its sanctity. So this is a complicated area, to say the least. We're joined now by journalist Tzipi Yarom. Thanks for being with us from Jerusalem. Tzipi, good to have you back on the program. Look, it's an intriguing divide. I define it this way: apparent among, let's say, the more religious elements of Israeli society, represented in parliament. How offensive is it to the ultra-Orthodox community, not just Muslims, that Jews visit this site?
The most this could be. This is completely outrageous that Itamar Ben-Gvir is going out there and doing that. Completely against halachic law, completely against the official position of the chief rabbinate, completely against most of the religious Zionist rabbis as well. That this is a very sacred place that currently we can't go there. There's no reason whatsoever going there. Maybe for saving lives, but Itamar Ben-Gvir definitely is not going there for saving lives. And there's no reason to do that. And that's the first part of it. The second part of it, that he's actually putting us in danger because he's enraging tons of Muslims against, because Muslims see that as violating their
and that's the status quo element. The status quo element that Gafni refers to is this arrangement with the Islamic authorities there that's been in place for decades now. Yeah.
Yes. And we the Haredi community see all kind of these activities as something that is also going against the Torah. You cannot do that. You don't have the authority to do something like that and enraging the entire Muslim world against us.
Well, small groups of Jews, and I think this has grown in recent years here, that there more and more have been visiting despite this ban. And any utterance of prayer, I should mention, not just people walking in there, not allowed to pray anything other than Islam. It's not allowed to open their mouth in prayer in this site. I want for our viewers to understand. But it seems this is more, as you're saying, of an issue surrounding Ben-Gvir, the personality, the figurehead, than about the religious concerns. Is there, concern about him and his politics within the ultra-Orthodox, political sector? Is he seen as a wild card?
Yes, but not on the mainstream, on the sides of the community, because think about community like it's called Shuvubani, which is part of the Breslov community that is going with him, and you can see support for him in this community. And it's kind of worrying us about it, but it's not going to be a mainstream view, his views.
Well, interesting subject, of course. Nothing simple about it. Tzipi Aron, thanks for being with us. Always appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, according to reports, the White House is seriously considering an Iranian proposal for indirect nuclear talks, while at the same time significantly boosting U.S. forces in the Middle East. And that's taking place in case President Trump opts for military strikes. Now, Trump has repeatedly said he'd prefer a deal, as we can picture him saying, but warned that without one, quote, there will be bombing, close quote. But his timeline is tight. Trump gave Iran a 2-month deadline to reach a deal. Not exactly clear when that clock started ticking. U.S. officials say no decision has been made and internal discussions are ongoing. And relations between the United States and Iran, once strong allies, believe it or not now, study your history, kids, have often been marked by deep mistrust there, fluctuating between cooperation and open hostility. You could go back to the 1953 coup orchestrated by the CIA and the ensuing reactionary 1979 Iranian Revolution. But here are some of the key moments that have defined this complex relationship.
In 1953, the United States helped orchestrate the overthrow of Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, reinstating the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who had close ties with the West. Fast forward to 1967, the U.S. provided Iran with a nuclear reactor and enriched uranium. Iran would sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968, promising not to pursue military nuclear capabilities. Relations remained strong in the 1970s. U.S. President Richard Nixon visited Tehran, cementing security ties and establishing Iran and Saudi Arabia as the twin pillars of U.S. Middle East strategy. Everything changed in 1979. Iran's Islamic Revolution forced the Shah into exile, and Ayatollah Khomeini returned to lead the country. Iranian students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, holding 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. By 1980, the U.S. had severed diplomatic ties, seized Iranian assets, and imposed severe trade restrictions. In 1983, Hezbollah, backed by Iran, launched a bombing attack on the U.S. Embassy and Marine barracks in Lebanon, killing 300 people. Despite the hostility, the Reagan administration secretly sold arms to Tehran in the 80s, and in 1988, a U.S. Navy warship mistakenly shot down an Iranian civilian plane, killing 290 people. In 2002, President George W. Bush labeled Iran part of the axis of evil. Tensions escalated, with accusations that Iran was developing nuclear weapons in secret. Following the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, Iran-backed militias launched attacks on American forces. In 2011, the U.S. uncovered an Iranian plot to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to Washington. In 2013, President Hassan Rouhani was elected, promising better relations with the world. In 2015, Iran and 6 world powers, including the U.S., reached a nuclear deal aimed at curbing Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. However, in 2018, President Donald Trump pulled the U.S. out of the nuclear deal, reimposing harsh sanctions. Relations hit a new low in 2020 when the U.S. killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, leading to missile strikes from Iran on U.S. military bases in Iraq. In 2022, massive anti-regime protests erupted in Iran, leading to U.S. sanctions against officials involved in the crackdown. By 2023, the U.S. and Iran engaged in a prisoner swap, signaling a small thaw in relations. Yet, in October 2023, the conflict escalated once again, as Iran-backed Hamas launched a deadly attack on Israel, with Iran's allies in Hezbollah and Yemen's Houthi group joining in. Israel retaliated, and the U.S. intervened to help shoot down Iranian missiles targeting Israel. As tensions continue to mount, U.S. President Donald Trump has warned Iran that failure to reach a nuclear agreement could lead to military action, a threat Iran has responded to with defiance, warning of severe retaliation. The complex, tumultuous history between the U.S. and Iran is far from over. As the region remains volatile, the question remains, can diplomacy prevail, or is this rivalry doomed to persist for generations?
Now, as Syria works to rebuild not only its infrastructure, but also military capabilities, Turkey has stepped into the security vacuum left by Russia and Iran, very notably. Now, the latest steps by Ankara to secure a strategic airbase in the center of the country, an airbase often targeted by the IDF in recent months. Let's take a look. Alex Schloss has the report.
As Turkey expands its footprint in Syria with the ascent of Turkish-backed militia to power in Damascus, Ankara is now forging ahead, not only with its diplomatic sway in the country, but also its military presence. According to recent reports, Turkey has started taking control of Syria's strategic Tayas Air Base, more commonly referred to as the T4 Air Base in central Syria. Ankara and Damascus have been negotiating a defense agreement since December, following the ouster of the Assad regime, although Turkish officials had previously downplayed the possibility of an expanded military presence in Syria, describing such plans as premature. Turkey has vowed to step in to secure camps housing ISIS-affiliated prisoners and combat the resurgence of the group.
Since ISIS does not harm one country but many countries at the same time, since it operates in many countries, even if a single country puts up a fight on its own and removes the threat from itself, it does not eliminate the threat. Therefore, it was important for the countries in the region to come together and establish a strong platform. And now, we have taken an important step in establishing this platform.
Meanwhile, in Syria's northeastern Kurdistan region, residents have expressed concerns over an expanded Turkish military presence, despite recent steps towards reconciliation between Ankara, Damascus, and Kurdish militia. Israel has regularly targeted Syrian military installations since the Assad government collapsed in December, with a recent surge in operations around T4.
The IDF has been operating in Syria in recent days to strike and destroy strategic capabilities that threaten the state of Israel. The Navy operated last night to destroy the Syrian fleet, and with great success. I hereby warn the rebel leaders in Syria, whoever follows Assad's path will end up like Assad. We will not allow an extremist Islamic terrorist entity to act against Israel across its border, and at the risk of its citizens, we will do everything necessary to remove the threat.
With Turkey stepping into the void left by Russia, it will likely make Israel think twice before striking facilities stationed by Turkish hardware and forces.
Of course, we keep our eye on all these most pressing security fronts and issues here on I-24 News. You get all the updates here as they occur. Now we look at another element here around Israel. The Israeli team from Camrotech, it's called, the first international team to arrive at the site of the earthquake disaster in Thailand. Now bringing with them their breakthrough technology that sees through walls. Now, in fact, the first survivor was rescued from the rubble at a depth of about 5 meters. That's deep, after being located using this technology, which has previously saved lives in disasters in Turkey and Mexico. Of course, we'll bring you more about those efforts, those Israeli efforts in Thailand here from the company when we can. But as the Jewish holiday of Passover approaches, the biannual cleaning of notes in the Western Wall is underway here. It's a phenomenon worth taking a look. Here you go.
A pre-Passover cleaning. Twice a year, the rabbi of the Western Wall in Jerusalem oversees the collection of thousands of notes, written prayers that visitors to the holy site in Jerusalem traditionally cram into its crevices.
Today we will attend a special ceremony which consists of taking out these pieces of paper and putting them in because they are holy paper in the archive and keep them for posterity. And we hope that everybody in the world will come to the Western Wall and pray as the world leaders to the Creator to have salvations in livelihood, in marital peace, children education, and happiness. All the blessings from the Western Wall.
According to the Western Wall Heritage Foundation, tens of thousands of notes are cleared during each cleaning, but this year has seen an increase due to war.
This year, these notes contain many wishes from soldiers, from wounded soldiers, from bereaved families, from people who went through the terrible disaster of October 7th, each with their own struggles. Some of them were here, many of them, and some sent us notes during this year. There are also notes here that were sent from around the world, from many countries. Even countries that are not friends of the State of Israel sent notes here.
Passover is the Jewish holiday celebrating the biblical story of the Israelites' liberation from slavery in Egypt after over 200 years.
There you have it, folks. Get your notes ready. There's room in those usually very crowded cracks in the wall of the Western Wall there. So come on down to Israel, come visit. Now, it's really an awesome story here in Israel. What was supposed to be a day of just family fun turned out to be much more for 3-year-old Ziv Nitzan. That's right, 3 years old. She discovered a rare archaeological find. Take a look.
From north to south, Israel is famously full of historical beauty and archaeological findings. Something that became very clear for 3.5-year-old Ziv Nitzan and her family when they took a trip to Tel Azika near Beit Shemesh, and the little girl discovered a rare archaeological artifact on the way.
אנחנו הלכנו בשביל כאן. זיו התכופפה בין כל 70,000 אבנים שהיו לידה, והרימה אבן. ואז היא שפשפה את החול, וראתה שמשהו שונה באבן.
A Canaanite scarab seal dating back approximately 3,800 years to the Middle Bronze Age.
זיו זאתי שמצאה את החרפושית בתל הזיקה, ממש על השביל הולכי רגל, ויצרו קשר עם רשות העתיקות, והנה אנחנו מעניקים להם תעודה, מודים מקרב לב, ותמשיכו כך.
This scarab amulet traces its origin to ancient Egypt, where beetles were seen as sacred symbols, embodying new life.
אנחנו מאוניברסיטת תל אביב חופרים את האתר הזה כבר כמעט 15 שנה. לכן הממצא הזה של חרפושית מצטרף להמון ממצאים מצריים וממצאים שנעשו כמו ממצאים מצריים. זה שמישהו שמטייל פה בתל ומוצא את זה, מעביר את זה לרשות העתיקות, והשיתוף פעולה של האוניברסיטה עם רשות העתיקות, זה חלק מכל המחקר והעבודה שנעשית פה כבר הרבה מאוד שנים.
The piece will be featured in a special Passover exhibit in Jerusalem, along with other ancient artifacts.
3-year-old kid. I gotta tell my kids to pay more attention to the ground when we go hiking around here. I always tell them anything's possible in this ancient land that we're in here. But that does bring us towards the end of the show today. Let's recap with the top story of the day here now. Pressing issue. Again, the Israeli army on the march in Gaza. Again, this is an expanding ground operation as we speak. Another division deployed to southern Gaza today. So, again, stay tuned on that. And, of course, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz, most significant updates being provided by him. He's ordered, quote, the capture of extensive territory that will be added to the state of Israel's security zones, close quote. Against this resumption of the ground operation, Katz really has given us the best indications of where the IDF operation could be headed. And this is on the heels of mass evacuation orders. This week he called on Gazans to, quote, act now to overthrow Hamas and return all the hostages, close quote. That announced that Israel again expanding the operation in Gaza, extensive airstrikes overnight in the southern part of the enclave, but there's an offensive also in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Again, this other division here, you'll get all the updates from us, certainly on the war and anything else, breaking news on I-24 News as it emerges. But for now, that's all the time I have for you, ladies and gentlemen around the world. I'm David Matlin, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. You've been watching The Rundown wherever you are in the world. Thanks for joining us.
Introducing the brand new i24 News Video On Demand app. You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions and expert commentary, all at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News Video On Demand app today. The 7th of October set in motion a chain of events. Today, Israel's enemies are severely weakened, but not defeated, and the balance of power is shifting. This region never rests. And for its own survival, Israel needs to keep its finger on the pulse. If you want to better understand, if you want to hear voices you won't hear elsewhere, then tune in daily to Middle East Now on i24 News. Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are? Introducing i24 News' brand new news website. On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News app today.
Welcome to Jewish World Weekly on i24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Every week we focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel and in the diaspora, the global Jewish community. And we start with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Sarah Rogers. Hi, Sarah.
Thanks, Emily. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Argentinian President Javier Milei has announced the declassification of documents pertaining to how war criminals were able to flee to South America. The files are set to shed some light on the so-called rat lines, which allowed Nazis such as Joseph Mengele and Adolf Eichmann to leave Germany via Central Europe and Central America towards the end of World War II. Most of these war criminals evaded justice for years, apart from Eichmann, who was abducted by Mossad and taken to Israel, where he was tried and executed. Construction has begun on the site of a historic Jewish cemetery in Poland, despite heavy protests and a lengthy legal battle. The Polish court ruled that the site in Nowa Słupia in southern Poland was not protected as a heritage site as it could not be fully verified, with workers claiming to dig 31 inches deep and not finding anything. This is contrary to records and satellite imagery from the 1940s, proving that it was in fact the site of the cemetery. Almost a quarter of Americans who were raised Jewish no longer identify with their religion, according to a survey done by Pew Research. According to the poll, 17% describe themselves as religiously unaffiliated, 2% now see themselves as Christian, 1% as Muslim, and 4% identify with a different religion. In total, 76% of Americans raised Jewish still identify with Judaism, similar to 77% of Muslim Americans and 73% of Christian Americans. Disney reportedly had to hire more security for Gal Gadot after she received death threats following a conflict with her Snow White co-star Rachel Zegler. After the trailer for Snow White dropped, Zegler, who plays the main character, tweeted "Free Palestine," an indirect attack at her Israeli co-star. According to Variety, Snow White producer Mark Platt, who is Jewish, flew across the country to ask Zegler to delete her post, which she refused. And finally, 5 men in Indianapolis have been arrested after filming a music video in a 100-year-old synagogue. The incident took place at the conservative and restructionist Bet El Tzedek synagogue, with the 5 men entering the building to film what they described as a rap music video. Police were called to the scene after eyewitnesses saw them breaking and entering, with 4 apprehended at the location and 1 arrested after a police chase. Those are your top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily.
As the U.S. is intensifying its crackdown on anti-Israel students on college campuses, the families of October 7th victims are also joining the fight by filing a lawsuit against organizations and their leaders, alleging that they knew about the October 7th attack as it unfolded. Here's more from I-24's Lynn Plachmeyer.
Families of October 7 victims have filed a lawsuit against anti-Israel activist groups and their leaders, alleging that based on their public relations activity, they had prior knowledge of the October 7 Hamas onslaught on Israel. Some groups reportedly reactivated their social media accounts just before the attack. Others are said to have issued protest and propaganda materials when the attack unfolded in southern Israel. The families are seeking compensation and punitive damages. One of the leaders who allegedly had prior knowledge to the October 7 attacks is Mahmoud Khalil. He's affiliated with the anti-Israel group Columbia University Apartheid Divest and is a well-known organizer of many pro-Palestine protests at Columbia University. He was detained on March 8 by the federal immigration authorities in a significant escalation by the Trump administration to detain and deport student activists.
This is not a matter of simply violating university rules. This is a movement, an anti-war movement. We have sparked similar Gaza solidarity encampments across the nation and even across the globe.
This is not about free speech. This is about people that don't have a right to be in the United States to begin with. No one has a right to a student visa. No one has a right to a green card, by the way. So when you apply for a student visa, or any visa to enter the United States, we have a right to deny you for virtually any reason. But I think being a supporter of Hamas and coming into our universities and turning them upside down and being complicit in what are purely crimes of vandalization, complicit in shutting down learning institutions. There are kids at these schools that can't go to class.
And so, as the IDF once again expands its military operation in Gaza, the crackdown on anti-Israel activists also intensifies.
Ben-Gurion University in the Negev is paving the way forward in the wake of the October 7th campaign to significantly enhance many aspects of the over 50-year institution and the Negev as a whole, fulfilling the dream of Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion. Now joining us in studio is Jeff Kay, the Vice President for Public Affairs and Resource Development at Ben-Gurion University. Hello, and thank you for being here.
Really, thanks for inviting me.
You're a busy man indeed.
Oh,
so, as we've seen, throughout history, when there have been crises or wars, we're seeing a generation of people from the diaspora feeling like they want to participate. What's unique about how this is really grown exponentially since October 7th, like never seen before?
So first of all, you're absolutely correct. I would say for at least 200 years, probably more, since travel from country to country began, the Israel diaspora relations, or the Eretz Israel Jewish community relations, have been defined in a whole lot of different ways, and one of them is giving philanthropy. We used to call it tzedakah. So this is nothing new. And if you look at the peaks of the history of the last 100 years, you will see that when there was a crisis in the Jewish world, and particularly in Israel, you see a dramatic increase in philanthropic gifts to Israel, to institutions in Israel. I think for a lot, first of all, there's a real need. People would identify a need and therefore want to give. But I think for people sitting outside of Israel, it's a way of them expressing their love and giving them something to do. And so again, you could see it just after the 67 war, you could see it after the Yom Kippur War, and a whole lot of times in our history line. And October 7th, of course, was a very dramatic moment in that time as well. I would say to you that, so Ben-Gurion University, as you mentioned before, we were hit disproportionately. We had, the first days, we had scores of students and faculty killed, thousands of people displaced, faculty, students, etc., kidnapped, hostages, and all of a sudden we had thousands of our students who were being drafted to go on Tzav Shmona emergency call-up, and we had a staff and leadership meeting on the 8th of October and said, okay, these are the things, this is the situation, and we need to provide needs for what's going on here, and actually decided not to launch an emergency campaign on that day. Because we said, we have to take care of business now. We have to give grants now. We have to buy new laptop computers for students. We have to find housing for displaced people. All of these needs, and it needs to be done now within hours. And if we now say we're going to go out and do this, but we're going to wait until the money is raised, then that's not doing the job, the speed we need to do. So we spent the money first and said, we said to our leadership, we'll come back in a few days, and if once our reserve is finished, depleted, we'll come back and say we need more money. And I think we got a lot of respect out of that by being not opportunistic. There was a huge demand. We met the demand and then said, okay, now we're a few days into this, let's see what we need. And we then launched a campaign for these very, very specific needs for both our community who had been affected immediately, and then the things that were about to happen in the weeks and months that followed, and raised a sum of like $12 million that helped us address the needs. And I think our donors respected us for being responsive and not opportunistic.
Right, of course. And I think, when you look at also the course of history and the other wars and what the needs were of the citizens at that given time, I mean, this time is so much more complicated. We're having soldiers and people talking about PTSD, things that weren't talked about in the wake of the other wars. People used to giving, you have, Israel, the bonds and the IDF and whatnot, but there are real needs of the people here on the ground. So I feel like, tell me if you agree, that people in the diaspora feeling so connected to where we're going through, there is a move also in a way that's actually going to help.
No, absolutely. But you have to differentiate between, you have to understand that there's sensitivity and people want to do the right thing. And if you're there with the right need at the right time, they will respond. And if you're there, let's just say cynically, then people will give, but they'll remember afterwards. One of the anecdotes I remember is that after the Carmel Forest fire, there was a branch of the Scouts in Eilat that was raising money to help the victims of the fire. Now, maybe that's an extreme example, and I feel nothing against the Scouts, but you cannot be in a situation. You have to be able to identify a real need and what the impact is going to be of an emergency situation. And the other thing that people have to understand, or organizations have to understand, is if you can't spend that money at the speed at which you're raising it, then it wasn't an emergency.
Right.
And I remember, as a lot of people will remember, after 9/11, the Red Cross raised millions hundreds of millions of dollars, and about a year later, a lot of that money was still there. And when asked, they said, well, we're keeping it for future disasters. We cannot be in that situation, and no Israeli institution, university, otherwise should be in that situation. If you say it's an emergency, it means you're going to need, you're able to spend the money now. That creates the trust that people are going to be with you when it's not an emergency as well.
Lastly, really quickly, because we're out of time, talk about, I know there are very big plans. I'm sure we'll hear more about it, but we know this was Ben-Gurion's vision. So is there going to be expansion of more programs, like as far as research, R&D, science?
I'll say two things. We were founded by a mandate by David Ben-Gurion long before it was called David Ben-Gurion University. Already in the 50s, he said there's got to be university. In order to be able to develop the Negev, you need scientists there to learn how to use the sun for energy and grow things and all of the things that people know about. There is a real danger at the moment that with instability in the Negev, there's a danger of depopulation, of the stronger population saying we're not going to stay there, we're going to move away. So Ben-Gurion University is doubling down on the mission that it had already, which is to reach out to the population in the Negev, whether it's the cities or the kibbutzim, and say, we're here for you, we can help in any way that you are able to identify as important to you. But our long-term plan is we received a plot of land called our North Campus. We're building a northern campus of our university in Beersheba, which will double the footprint of the university, and that will take care of an increasing number of students coming, but also the IDF intelligence and communication users who are moving down, and the idea is to give them a university degree at the same time as they're serving the country.
Wow. Jeff Kay, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you again as more great plans develop.
Thank you very much.
Various countries in Europe and elsewhere have emerged since October 7th to champion Palestinian statehood, despite the dominant jihadist elements. And one such place is Norway, where the government has stood out for its clear side in this war. I-24 News correspondent Adi Cohen from our sister Hebrew channel went there and filed this report.
18 months of prolonged and bloody war in the Middle East have managed, it seems, to make its way all the way to the remote regions of Scandinavia. Ripples, some would say, which verge on a tsunami.
To resist the injustices done by our government in our name.
Since the October 7 massacre, and despite its echoing horrors, Norway has become one of the countries in Europe most hostile to Israel.
Norway was among the very first Western countries to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. We have condemned the violations of international humanitarian law.
Anerkjennelse av Palestina en støtte til moderate krefter som på vikende front I en langvarig og grusom konflikt.
In the past year and a half, this hostility has been expressed through Norway's harsh condemnations of Israel, with Oslo even going so far as to file a lawsuit against Israel in The Hague. Then there is also Norway's campaign to defend and support UNRWA, as well as its recognition of a Palestinian state, and not forgetting the Norwegian government's ban on the kingdom, sending its condolences for the massacre, or recognizing Hamas as a declared terrorist organization. A hostile sentiment which is also expressed out on the streets, almost in every corner.
But the government bears the largest responsibility. But the government sees that anti-Israel moves and rhetoric is popular also with the large chunk of the population. Only a few days after the massacre, there was a change of Minister of Foreign Affairs in Norway. He, Espen Barth Eide, he has single-handedly, together with the Prime Minister, changed the Norwegian policy towards Israel.
We need to establish a Palestinian government, a Palestinian state, and the Palestinian state has to be recognized.
The party decided to adopt the full economic boycott of Israel, and they are now working to make it the policy of the party itself.
Almost every week, the streets of the capital, Oslo, are flooded with mass demonstrations, but even away from them, the locals advise me when I visit to avoid Israeli symbols or even not to speak Hebrew.
you could have some unpleasant experiences, unfortunately, especially from young Muslim men, but also from ethnic Norwegian leftists.
I think in Norway we have quite a strange situation, coincidence, where especially the left side of a political is very Palestinian-friendly. Palestinian cause is almost a part of the left-wing politics in Norway. I became aware of it after October 7 that people are basically blinded. It doesn't matter what Israel does, what Israel says, they will always be against Israel.
And as in too many destinations where the anti-Israel climate triumphs over public consciousness without any real counter-reactions, anti-Semitism raises its head.
We've got people that's been beaten up. We had people who had to go in hiding in a way as well. People had things written on the door. Luckily, I live just out of Oslo.
For being Jews or being Israeli supporters?
Both. Last year, and he was a Christian Norwegian guy, got beaten up actually.
Why?
Because he had an Israeli flag. I grew up in a beautiful country. Norway is actually quite beautiful. I never had problems being a Jew in Norway. Never felt any anti-Semitism at all when I grew up. My upbringing was different from what my kids has felt. Knew the last 20 years it started to become tougher to live in Norway.
For some, it probably has root in anti-Semitism, but I'm not eager to put that label on it. 33% of the Norwegian public says that their conception about Israel affects what they think about Jews in general.
Our few supporters in Norway attribute the hostile discourse against Israel mainly to the rampant disinformation fueled by the local media, schools, and well-funded pro-Palestinian organizations.
There was a survey done last year where 50% of the Norwegians said Israel treats the Palestinians as badly as Jews were treated during the Second World War.
Wow.
50%. There are very widespread misconceptions in the Norwegian public about Israel's situation. More than 20% says that as long as the state of Israel exists, there cannot be peace in the world. It's a result of not only bias in the media, but also in the textbooks in school, where they learn the story only almost according to the Palestinian narrative, and you don't get the Israeli story.
For the past 2 decades, Conrad has been running MIF, a non-religious pro-Israel organization, which has supported a distant Jewish state since the 70s. In the past year and a half, the reality has become particularly charged and tense.
We have had several instances when meetings and events have been disturbed by anti-Israel activists. That feels threatening. We have had to pay tens of thousands of euros in having security companies help us during events and meetings. The Norwegian government has not spoken out against this mob that is threatening and intimidating. There has been a few violent incidents against Friends of Israel, and I'm also concerned that this has not been condemned strongly.
I get a lot of hate from it almost every day, and sometimes at work, but I always say my opinion. Even when I'm at work, I say that I support Israel. I get told that I support child murders, that I'm a Nazi, which makes no sense.
We met MIF members at a weekend of consolidation and enrichment for the organization's young people in one of the forests of Norway, far from the radar of the protesters.
So my father is a Jew, so I always knew about Israel, but I never thought that much about the political side of it before October 7th. And then when I saw a brutal massacre of people in Israel and everything what followed, I became very interested in the political side of things. And I think that Israel have a better argument. I also have a strong opinion about media reaction in Norway to the conflict.
History in Europe and in the Muslim world cries to us that there is a need for the Jewish people to be sovereign in their own land.
Thus, the work of those organizations like MIF enters a place where the state has failed for years in the propaganda war, while clearly underestimating the real threat inherent in the growing wave of hatred against Israel, which, as a consequence of this, is directed at Israelis and Jews around the world.
When it comes to, in terms of the Norwegian public, unfortunately, the Norwegian public has been accidentally brainwashed by seeing just pictures and photos. As of course, they're devastating, but they see only one side of the conflict.
Very ashamed that we have paid for Hamas support. I want to say that you have people here that actually know the truth and see your suffering, and we will never stop.
We are here, and we're going to be here. But I think we're going to win the struggle in the end. But it's going to be a tough fight. But we will win the struggle both in Israel and here as well.
Last week's International Conference on Combating Anti-Semitism in Jerusalem experienced quite a bit of pushback over the inclusion of many far-right European politicians, leading many to choose to cancel their attendance. Politicians, world leaders, advocates, influencers, and entertainers converged to talk about the anti-Semitic issues facing Jews, not just in Israel, but around the world. And joining us now with one of those people that made everybody laugh last week is Ami Kozak, comedian, impressionist, musician, Jewish advocate, influencer, and I'm sure so many other things. A real-life renaissance man.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Good to meet you. You're very popular and you're very funny. Tell us about this conference and, you know, from your perspective, what was the experience like?
So for me, my role there was to bring levity and laughter. Obviously, the subject matter of combating anti-Semitism in its current form today is very heavy, and there were a lot of panels and speeches addressing serious issues. And I found my function there was to unify everybody and kind of transcend the politics and just be able to laugh. So it was broken up throughout the day into various panels and important discussions to be had. And then at the end of the day, at the nighttime program, we had some fun, and artists were singing songs, and I came out and was able to.
That's a lot of pressure. I mean, you know, come out of serious depression and then, like, I mean, we know humor is the only way that the Jewish people have gotten through many tragedies, but
I got
with
lucky.
those kind of people in the room.
Yeah, I got lucky because at one point I was approached and said, okay, so Bibi want to speak for 2 hours. So the room gonna empty out after that. I don't know when you wanna go because he gonna come and then it's over. So what do you wanna do? And I'm like, so there was an Israeli element to it of things kind of moving and ebb and flow. But luckily, I got into a time slot where I think people were ready to laugh. Yeah. And I was able to come out and bring out, do some of their favorite Israeli politicians and American politicians as well.
So, like, let's hear it.
Oh, you know, your favorite president, he wasn't there, but he wished he could be there in spirit. So I brought the next best thing, your favorite president, Donald J. Trump. So good for Israel, ambassadors of truth. And the Ministry of Diaspora was there. I even said, you know, diaspora is a word I hadn't heard before, Emily. It's actually Melania's sister's name, Diaspora. She's a great, beautiful person, Diaspora. We love that. And we had a great time, and I brought out a little bit of Bibi, did a little Bibi for the folks, a little bit of President Herzog, so that was a lot.
People have a sense of humor about the Bibi impressions?
Well, after he went, it sort of warmed them up. They started with Bibi and they ended with Bibi. It was like bookends. It was a beautiful thing. And all the words that Bibi uses are beautiful words, you know. They say Trump has the best words, but actually Bibi, you know, we will defend Israel tirelessly, vigorously, relentlessly, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
And that's kind of the opposite energy of Herzog, which I met the night before at his event, and it was more like, you know, he has kind of one emotion, so he's very steady. So when he gets up, it's just like, I am totally outraged by anti-Semitism. Really, truly, can't you tell? I am outraged, really, truly, really. And I kind of feel like he just took an Ambien, you know, he's very, very calm, very, very calm. Really, truly, I just stubbed my toe. It's okay. Iran and his proxies will try to destroy us, but first I will take a nap, and then we'll deal with it. So it was fun. We had a good time.
It's amazing how you could go back and forth between people in one sentence almost.
Yeah.
How do you split your brain like that?
You know, it's like my little X-Men superpower ever since I was a kid. And my parents were saying, Ami, go on the table and do so-and-so. You know, I grew up with sort of that Borscht Belt.
So you had that pressure of, like, parents making you, as a kid, entertain the friends?
Yeah, I'm a youngest child, so it's just sort of, and I'm short, so that's how you stand out. You got to be hilarious. And if you're the youngest in the family, and at a very young age, my parents were they were professionals, but they loved that I could imitate all their friends and stuff. So I was standing on the coffee table just imitating my dad's friends in like the Catskills in the summer. So we came from that like spirit of admiring comedy.
Yeah, well, and it also sounds like you enjoyed it. It wasn't like your parents were like, look at my son and perform and make people laugh.
You know, all of a sudden being able to turn into other people creates this huge reaction, and I've used that power ever since to my benefit. So.
And has anyone used it on you, impersonating you?
My children try to do it, where they're like, you know, they imitate my tired dad bod walking around the house. So I have it coming, you know, when you have little kids at home. I have it coming. They find me funny for now, but it's going to run out at a certain point.
Well, at least they find you funny for now. My kids don't care that I'm on TV. I'm like, don't you think it's cool your mom's on TV?
It's fun when your kids start to imitate you and you feel like, oh my God, I'm really raging too much. And it's like, that's what they do.
Ami, thank you so much.
Thank
and
you.
It's good to see you and come back next time you're here.
Looking forward. Always love being here. Thank you.
So that's all for this week's episode of Jewish World Weekly. Thank you so much for watching. You can head over to the I-24 News YouTube channel to catch up on